Madam Minister, Miss Ambassador, Mr. Ambassador, dear students, dear professors. It's both pleasure and honor for us today to welcome Miss Marina Kaliurandim, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Estonia, to Ilia State University. And the sources and reasons for this pleasure and honor are many. First of all, Estonia, as you know, is the key ally and friend of Georgia on the way to democratization, development, European and Euro-Atlantic integration, being its constant supporter, without which I think we would have a hard time to reach these goals. Secondly, Ilia State University has been cultivating very close links with Estonian institutions and partners, with the Embassy of Estonia in Georgia, with Estonian higher education institutions. And we are very much honored that this year, in June, we received the President of Estonia, Mr. Ilves, who found time to visit Ilia State University, inspect some of its labs, and interact with the students. So, third and last but definitely not least, we are very honored and very pleased to have one of Europe's most outstanding diplomats in our walls today. Just some biographical details. Ms. Kaliurandim studied both in Estonia and the United States, graduating Tartu University, Estonian School of Diplomacy, and Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. At different times, she was Estonian ambassador to Israel, Russia, United States, Mexico, and Canada. And at these jobs, she had the ample opportunity to demonstrate her prowess and skill as a diplomat. Just to say one example, she had to handle a very difficult situation in Russia in 2007 when the so-called bronze soldier of Tallinn was being relocated, and as every observer in Russia and outside of it admitted, she did an outstanding job in this regard. At the same time, she is very well known as a formidable speaker, so we are very keen and very looking forward to listening to her speech and then having a discussion on the demands and challenges of foreign policy in 2015 and 2016. So, Ms. Kaliurandim, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Honorable Rector. You make me blush because your words are too kind but what is true is that, yes, I've been a career diplomat for more than 20 years, and I've been now minister for less than 4 months. So I'm not a member of any political parties in Estonia. So it was a challenge for me to accept this position, but I can say that I like it more and more with every day. And thank you so much for welcoming us at the university, at the Ilia University. I have also my staff here, and what's good today, being minister, my staff has to answer all the difficult questions if I don't have the answers. So besides ambassador, we have our director of division responsible for Russia and Eastern Partnership countries. We have our desk officer responsible for Georgia and my spokesperson from Press and Information Department. So that's our team here. And Sven in the back from our embassy. I'm sorry, you're so modest in the back row, so I didn't mention you immediately. So that's our team here today, and I'll be happy to discuss different questions with you. First, I thought that I'll start with some introductory remarks of Estonian foreign policy. From there, I'll move to the topics that are most important for me as a foreign minister at the moment. I'll be very open for your comments. I will be even very eager to hear what you think, because you are the decision makers of the next generation. And I'll be happy to answer the questions if I can. If not, I promise we will answer later, either in a written or oral form, but definitely we will answer them. So I'll stand so that I'll see more of you. I don't want to stand with my back to you. I'll be here. But just some facts. First of all, I love your shirt.
Thank you. I'm a friend of Estonia.
I can see that. Ladies and gentlemen in the first row with the T-shirt Estonia. and we didn't pay him. He's doing it voluntarily. But when we talk about Estonia, those of you, how many of you have been to Estonia? Just one? Okay, you are paid to go to Estonia. But I'm sure that your parents have been to Estonia, either during their student years or honeymoon or just visiting, but I'm sure that your parents have been to Estonia. So what I'd say, I'd encourage also you to come. Estonia is the country that's worth visiting. And our history, just some data from our history. Estonia regained independence in 1918, yeah? And Estonia was an independent state between 1918 and 1940. Then it was Soviet occupation, German occupation, again Soviet occupation, and we regained independence in 91. Which means that now we have been independent country longer than we were between the two world wars. What was the lesson that we learned between the two world wars, when the foreign policy was to be neutral, to be independent, don't interfere into global affairs, try to be aside and try to have good relations with everybody. The lessons we learned was that we disappeared like that from history books, from international relations, from the list of independent countries of the League of Nations, from all policy books and so on. We disappeared as an independent state. So when Estonia regained independence in 91, it was clear from the very beginning that we want to restore ourselves in international affairs, and we want to be in all organizations where we can share the principles and the values of the organizations with other like-minded countries. Being a small country with population 1.3 million, we need partners, we need allies, we need friends, like-minded friends, to make ourselves more heard and to participate in decision-making processes and to participate in international affairs. That was clear. That's why from the beginning of 91, our aim was to become members of the EU, members of NATO. As you can imagine, nobody was waiting us there. So when we were entering from the doors, we were kicked out, we were entering from the windows, we were doing our reforms, we were working hard, and integration with EU was a logical step. Because if I compare 90s to today's world, then even when Ukraine decided or Georgia decided to choose a path towards EU, then today it seems to irritate Russia more than it did at the beginning of the 90s. We didn't see any fight from Russian side against our integration towards EU. NATO was different. NATO is always a political decision. It needs consensus of the organization, and yes, you have to be prepared, yes, you have to do your reforms, but in the end, it's a political decision. So what was our aim? Our aim was to get prepared and wait for the window of opportunity. And the window of opportunity came when President Putin was in his first term, and US President was brave enough to say, we have to take Baltics in, because that is the right thing to do. So we were lucky to grab that, use that, take advantage or use that window of opportunity and become members of the EU and NATO. Today, Estonia is the most integrated country in Northern Europe. We are members of all international organizations we ever wanted to join. Besides EU and NATO, it's also OECD, we are members of Schengen, we are members of Eurozone, so we are sitting around the table with all the like-minded countries that we want to. So we were not collecting memberships. It wasn't just the number of memberships, but it was participation in the decision-making processes. Today, I'm proud of my country. I think that we did excellent reforms in some 10 plus years, but we couldn't have done them without the support of our partners. We were lucky to have Scandinavian countries as good neighbors who were very strongly supporting us. We had support from the United States, we had support from UK, we had support from democratic countries who supported the reforms we were undergoing. So when I say that I'm proud of my country, we are ready to share it with everybody who assisted us and who was behind the reforms, financially, also with human resources and so on. If you remember 91, we were all in the same position. We were Soviet republics. So we had to do reforms to reform ourselves to be democratic states with market economy, with rule of law, with human rights. Otherwise, it would have been impossible to members of the EU and NATO because the criteria is there. Today, we are assisting all those countries who want to do democratic reforms. And that's why Georgia, among other countries, is our priority. I'm proud to say that every year my country allocates 1 million euros to development cooperation, to assist your public officials, to do exchanges of students, to do development cooperation in all different fields. And as long as you stay on the course of reforming and closer integration with EU and transatlantic tie, we are with you. So that sometimes we're accused of being more Georgians than Georgians themselves. Sometimes we're accused of being more Ukrainians than Ukrainians themselves. But it's a decision, it's a political decision. We support those countries who want to do democratic reforms. We have the experience. We're not teaching from the textbooks. The people who did reforms in Estonia are still alive, and very much so, and for tens of years to come. So we have that advantage. We're not teaching from history of 100 years, or we're not teaching from textbooks. And we could be examples that reforms could bring prosperity to nation and could bring brighter future closer to nation. These decisions were not easy in Estonia, because if we look, for example, at the political decisions, then in NATO, Estonia is among four countries that is fulfilling the commitment of 2% of GDP for 2% of GDP for defense. It's a political decision. That money comes from somewhere, from teachers' salaries, from medical care, from somewhere. It doesn't come from the air. It comes from, these are political decisions. When we were undergoing economic crisis like the rest of the world, and we did budgetary cuts, we cut our budget 10% of GDP. And these were real cuts. So for example, in MFA, our salaries were cut roughly by 15-20%. We didn't close embassies, but we had to reduce our staffs in embassy. So these were real cuts. And the government that did that was re-elected. So what I'm trying to say is that people are smart. In the end, people understand what is good for their future. What else have we learned? We have learned what does solidarity mean. So we were among the countries who were bailing out Greece, although their living standards are higher than ours. We were the countries that was bailing out Spain. We are the countries that's doing our fair share in today's migration crisis. because that's solidarity. That's something that we learned and we missed in 1940, and we're not going to miss anymore. From here I'll jump to the subjects that are today most important subjects or most important topics we're dealing with. It's like in Georgia. First, I'll mention aggressive behavior of Russia, occupation of Crimea, and military activities in eastern Ukraine. Our position towards Ukraine is the same as it's towards Georgia. We support territorial integrity and sovereignty of each and every country. And we support the right of each and every country and people to choose their future, whether they want to do it with this organization, that organization, or third organization. That's the choice of people. And that's why we follow non-recognition policy of Crimea's occupation, like the whole of EU and other countries. And we're following very closely our aggressive neighbor. And I say aggressive neighbor because we're a neighboring country. And we see provocative acts. Either they are military exercises very close to our border, or violations of airspace, of Estonian airspace, or undetermined ships in the Baltic Sea, or flights with transponders not switched in our airspace that are dangerous to all civilian aircrafts. We see these activities and we follow them very closely. Russia has violated the European security structure and human rights laws, international law, as was agreed by mankind after the Second World War. That's a fact. Does it mean that the European structure does not exist anymore? I would argue no. The fact that one country violates doesn't make the whole system not working. But the country that violates has to be brought back to fulfilling that country's obligations. And here I'm really proud that EU has been united. EU has been speaking in one voice, being it more widely attitude towards Russia or specifically sanctions, EU is united. And I'm really proud about that. Because if you think about it, well, usually in this group you have, 40 persons. Try to agree on one place where to go to party on Friday. You will argue here for a couple of hours. And now you have 28 sovereign, independent countries. And try to make them speak in one voice. That's not easy. But it's doable when the aim is the same and you share the same principle and values. I can't say that we agree with everything EU does. Yes, I even sometimes disagree with my colleagues from the EU. I sometimes disagree with my American colleagues, and that's okay. Because in principle, we have the same values. So we might have disagreements, but we are on one side. And that matters. So that's one of the questions that is very important for us at the moment. Maybe there will be a question from the audience, but I can answer immediately. Could the scenario of Crimea happen in Estonia? The answer is no. The answer is no, and definitely no. I'd like to quote what our chief of staff said some months ago when he was asked the question, what do you do when you see the first green men in your country? And his answer was, we will shoot them. Okay, he's military. I'm foreign affairs. But I can say that the history of 1940 will not be repeated in Estonia. No way. There's no way for that. Even if attitude towards Ukraine has created different opinions among Estonian population, especially among Russian-speaking population. And we have 1/4 of our population is Russian-speaking population. Then the attitude toward any other country or Russia protecting someone's human rights in Estonia is definitely no. And the question about separation part of Estonia and becoming part of another country, the answer is definitely no. The second issue that is on the table and that is important at the moment, it's migration crisis. As I said, Estonia is committed to take our fair share, which means that we will accept in 2 coming years 535 refugees. It's a formula which has been developed by the Commission. It seems fair to us. It takes into account the GDP, population, unemployment rate, and some other objective data of each and every country. So for us, it's 535 refugees in coming 2 years. Most probably the first ones will arrive in the winter. As a human being, I feel sorry for that, because trust me, winter is not the best time to arrive to Estonia. Summer is much better. But we are prepared, we'll do all preparations, and our aim is to integrate refugees as quickly as possible so that they become part of Estonian society, they start contributing to our society, their kids and they learn Estonian language, and then, as I said, become part of Estonian society. And what is easier for us is that we're learning from mistakes of others. Some countries have made mistakes when dealing with refugees, and we have the advantage of learning from those mistakes, not to create ghettos, start integration, and so on and so on and so on. So at the moment we're in the process of preparation, but I do hope that we will be successful in integrating refugees. Could it be 100% success? No, because there are humans. There are criminals in our society, so perhaps there will be bad people among those coming as refugees to Estonia, but we can do everything we can to make the probability as small as possible, so that our police officers and border guard officers are already in the refugee camps, talking to people, explaining them situation in Estonia, and making clear who are real refugees and who are just economic migrants. And terrorism. Never before since restoration of Estonia's independence has terrorism been so close to our borders as it is today. But that's our common challenge, where we can be effective only if we act together and then take responsibility together, coordinate our actions, then our fight against terrorism could be successful. And final words about Estonia as a very successful ICT country with internet services, e-services. As I said today in the morning at the launch of a twinning project on e-governance, even the name of our country is Estonia, which means that we pay great attention to all internet and e-services. Our population receives more than 2,000 different services, starting from parliamentary elections, local elections, taxation, banking, e-school, e-police. E-school meaning that as a parent I can follow to some extent what my kids are doing at school. So when they were going to school, I could check their grades even before they came home. But as I said, I could follow to some extent. There are some parts of e-school that the kids can follow only themselves. But it's open for parents, it's a good platform for exchanging views with teachers, and more important, keeping eye on the grades. So altogether about 2,000 services, and that's something where again we are ready to share our experience. And because we've seen that ICTs and peaceful use of ICTs contributes to the development of each and every society. Political development, social development, economic development. And once we have the tools, we have to take advantage of them. Because cyber came to stay. Cyber will not disappear. And that's why we launched pilot projects for our kids in the first grade to teach programming, and also cyber hygiene. Cyber hygiene meaning how to behave in cyber world once you push the button on or slide the screen. And we have cybersecurity and e-governance master programs in our universities. So if there is anybody who's interested, please come. We have excellent programs of cybersecurity, besides also other programs in our universities. So having said that,
I think that we can move to the discussion part of our meeting. First of all, thank you very much for this concise but eloquent presentation, not only of the Estonian foreign policy, but also of Estonia as a country in general. Yes, I think. And would you like to take a seat, or should I? Okay, I think that I will just use my privilege as a moderator to ask the first question, because the problems you presented, or the challenge you presented for Estonia, are very much like, some of them at least, the problems we are experiencing, with the difference that we are experiencing them, of course, in a far graver form, and their origin is, of course, our common neighbor. So my question would be, do you think that the sanctions against Russia have been effective, and do you think that they will be prolonged, because there is a lot of discussion about this issue? Do you think that European Union and other international organizations or international actors will renew and will prolong these sanctions?
Well, thank you for the question. Well, first of all, yes, it's my personal opinion that the sanctions have worked. Not sanctions alone, but the whole complex of economic developments or not developments, of oil prices, of sanctions altogether. Yes, it has influenced Russia, definitely. But even maybe more than specific sanctions, I think that the EU's unity is the best sanction. That EU speaks in one voice and and EU expresses common position. I think that's even more important. Yes, we hear discussions. Yes, we know that there is a wish or try from Russian side to start reversing the process of sanctions. With the information I have today, and with the discussions we have had with the foreign ministers in the EU, I can say that today EU is united and stable, and most probably the prolongation of sanctions in January will be pretty easy. In January. What will happen after that remains to be seen. And another thing maybe I'd like to draw your attention to, when you listen to what politicians or ministers are saying, usually there's a huge difference. I'm not talking about myself, but about some ministers. What they're saying at home and what they're saying in Brussels, and what is their official position. So sometimes I look at the person and I just wonder, that person was saying completely different things yesterday in his or her own capital. And the person says different things if that person sits at the table of OSCE foreign ministers or NATO foreign ministers. So always put it into the context, and having listened to the discussions and participated in the discussions of the EU foreign ministers, yes, I can say that EU today is united, speaks in one voice, and has the same assessment of our policy towards Russia.
Thank you very much. And now I am opening the floor for questions. So,
I have a question. Thank you, Ms. Kaliurandim. You took some time to come over here and delivered great speech. I am a friend of Estonia. During Youth Olympic Games in July this year, I was chef attaché to the Team Estonia. I worked with Marina Kaliurandim. She was the chef de mission. So it was my pleasure to be with you guys. That's why I came here today, and I was really excited. Then I have two questions. I got a lot more, but let me ask you two key questions. First of all, we talked about integration of Georgia to European Union. In that perspective, we need visa-free travel to European Union. What do you think? What is your perspective in that? How long we need to wait? What are the challenges, and what do you think is the end of tunnel? Because European Union is promising that way to Europe like last few years, but it's been postponing for like every 6 months. They're not approving the decision. Second question is, imagine you are the prime minister or foreign minister of Georgia. So just, for a short
Pretty
period
difficult, but
yes.
right.
So imagine we have all the problems with, first of all, Russia, political problems, border issues. What would you do to fix these issues? Because we're neighbors of Russia and we cannot relocate to Europe physically. So we need to stay here. So what are the key factors you think is important? Of course, I understand you're a diplomat. You have certain framework you need to work within.
Yes, I'll start with the second question. And I'll imagine myself as an advisor to Georgian foreign minister. And my advice would be, continue with European integration. If that's the decision of your people, and if that's the decision of your country, continue with that, be determined, and even maybe sometimes if you get disappointed, don't let it take you down. And second, I'll say, think about communication. Because I'm talking from my own experience of my own country. Our path towards integration wasn't very smooth and easy all the time. There were setbacks. But it was important that there was a political will to continue. And second, when I say strategic communication, it sounds like a very sophisticated word. But in practical terms, it means explaining your political decisions, and they have to be explained. Sometimes we even need interpretation. When the EU says something, what does it mean? If we say something, what does it mean for Europe? So we have to explain in very simple, in very practical terms, different policies and different decisions. So that was an easy question. But coming to visa freedom, there is no question about that Estonia is a country that supports visa freedom, free trade agreements, EU, NATO, open door policies. The objective criteria has to be fulfilled. If the objective criteria is fulfilled, then it is a slightly political decision, but it is a political decision. As much as I know today, Georgia has done absolutely wonderful job in fulfilling the criteria for visa liberalization, which means visa freedom. So today we are expecting a positive recommendation from the Commission, and today I live knowing that most probably Georgia will get visa freedom at the beginning of the next year. Well, in practical terms, which means that soon after that, Georgians will be able to come to visit Europe without visas. But there is always political side, and there is always the perception. Everything does not only has to be right, but it also has to seem right. The perception is very important. And here we discussed with Foreign Minister today very openly and very frankly all those issues. And of course Europe and we are following what's happening at the moment with media, with freedom of expression. Georgia is a democratic country, and Georgia has to show that its judiciary is independent, that media freedom will not suffer, and Georgia will continue with the reforms that you have started, being it public administration or judiciary, internal security. You have to continue with those. And if the political side will continue as it has so far, I don't see any obstacles for Georgia to receive visa freedom very soon and to step one step closer to integration with Europe.
Georgi Gwalia, Ilyas State University. First of all, I would like to thank you, Foreign Minister, for very interesting speech. I would like to thank other guests for visiting Ilyas State University, and I would like to thank the whole Estonia as a country for supporting our Georgian aspirations and in different fields, not only foreign policy. You just mentioned cybersecurity. I used to work at the National Security Council of Georgia for years, and I have quite good experience of working with team from Estonia, experts dealing with the cybersecurity. So your help, your support was visible and still remains visible in every field of whether it being public policy or social or economic sphere. I have kind of the tough question. I know that you are a foreign minister and it's quite difficult to be very frank in most of the cases, but try to be as frank as possible. Estonia is the member of NATO. And NATO is actually the political military organization and the basis of which is the Article 5 that states that in case of the attack on any member of the NATO, the principle of defending each other begins to operate. Do you think that in a very, very worst case scenario, if there is some kind of the military threat from our neighbor, in our case, from our northern neighbor, the NATO will be effective? I mean, in case if there is some kind of the physical threat to Estonia's territorial integrity. I ask this question because the Georgian war in 2008, Crimea conflict and Ukrainian case actually demonstrates that there are no guarantees in this system, especially in the post-Soviet space. Do you think that NATO will be as one in voice as you just talked about the European Union? Thank you.
And thank you for a question. It's a very good question. First of all, I'd like to make a very clear distinction and very clear difference. You mentioned post-Soviet space. But there is a clear distinction between NATO members and those who are not NATO members. Estonia, being NATO member, has today much stronger guarantees than those countries who are not NATO members. And that's not only because of NATO's action and Article 5 collective defense, as you mentioned, but also thanks to what we ourselves are contributing on an everyday basis. So there are two parts. First, what we are doing ourselves to protect us. And I mentioned 2% of GDP defense expenditure, which is only 4 countries in NATO are doing that. US, UK, Estonia, Greece. Poland is coming pretty close to that. We are still encouraging also all other members or all other allies to increase their expenditures. So that's our part. And NATO as an organization, it's again, I think it's very much the way of thinking. NATO is us. It's not that there are Estonian soldiers and there are NATO soldiers. We are NATO. Every military base in Estonia is NATO. We have NATO military presence in Estonia. We have American troops, we have Germans, UK, Denmark. We have rotating air policing of the Baltic states. Baltic states do not have capacity to protect our airspace. It's smart defense in the NATO. Everybody's contributing in the field where they're really good. So I'd say we're much more contributing in cyber defense and not buying aircrafts. But there is a NATO air policing operation which takes rotations, and NATO is present. If you look at the Wales summit decisions of the NATO summit in Wales a year and a couple of months ago, September last year, those were very principled decisions to strengthen the eastern part of NATO. So what is the best defense? Deterrence is the best defense. I think that Russia is following very closely what's happening in NATO, what's happening in the Baltic states, what's happening in the bordering country. So the best proof is if President Putin sees in practical terms that yes, we have presence of our allies besides ourselves, we have planning, we have stabi element. We have NATO's staff elements in our territory. We are preparing for pre-positioning and so on and so on and so on. And these are joint efforts. So I'd say that deterrence most important, because once war starts, it will be a disaster for anybody. So we have to make the picture very clear that it's suicidal to start a military attack against any NATO member state. But of course we have to be, do we foresee that Russia could cross border with military weapons and tanks or something? No. Do we have to be prepared for provocations? Yes. We have to be prepared, we have to follow the situation, and as I said, we have seen some marks or some behavior, provocative behavior, and we react to that. So to conclude, I'm confident in my country's security, and I'm absolutely confident, 100% and more, that the history of 1940 will not happen again in Estonia and in the other Baltics, and hopefully anywhere in the world.
After you talked about Estonia, I would like to know how easy it is for Georgian citizens to acquire Estonian traveling visa. Yeah.
Good to be back here. I actually have to give this question to my consul, but there is no Estonian visa as such. There is a Schengen visa. It's the same criteria to visit any Schengen country. So criteria are clear, not too complicated, but we hope with visa freedom, of course, this visiting will get much easier. So, but if you have concrete, detailed questions regarding that, I will put you in contact with our consul. So, thanks.
And before you ask the question, go to our website of embassy and MFA. There we have pretty detailed information about how to acquire visa, because there are different categories for students, non-students, tourists, and so on and so on. So it's very difficult to answer like that. But in principle, it's easy to get to Estonia, so please, either take visas as souvenirs last time to come to Estonia, or wait for visa freedom and come without visas to Estonia.
So then I'll ask a question. What do you think, from your experience and from your knowledge of Georgia, what would be for us the key reform, just one, to name one, key reform to implement in order to be closer to the European space we are aspiring to? For you, what do we think would be political, I don't know, social, economic, or something? Would you have a kind of advice, of course, not to your counterparts, but to the academic community who is listening to you?
I'm not going down that slippery road because I don't know so well. I'm not in the position to judge which is the one and the most important reform. But a week ago, I participated in a seminar that took place in Tallinn, and there were participants from Eastern Partnership countries, all Eastern Partnership countries: Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Belarus. And they were discussing internal mechanisms, administrative mechanisms for European integration. I was listening to that, and it seemed to me that seemed to be an important thing to all the Eastern Partnership countries. But don't take it as my advice to your country. You have to make up your own mind, and you have to make it clear, and your ambassador here is paid to know what is the most important reform in Georgia. But that discussion I listened to in Estonia on integration mechanism, whether there should be integration ministers, European ministers, or how to make up, or how to create coordination between ministries. that seemed to be important. And from our experience, I can say it was a very important topic. Because when we were joining EU, all the ministries were joining EU, only defense was going to NATO, but all the others were joining the EU, and we needed excellent coordination mechanism so that nothing will fall between different ministries and we will not duplicate each other. So coordination extremely important.
It's my pleasure indeed to have a couple of words here. Thank you very much for the floor. I'm Georgian ambassador to the Republic of Estonia. So first of all, concerning Georgia's EU integration, of course it's up to democracy, rule of law, freedom of media, and all those common values and common principles with us and European Union, of course. All those reforms really matters a lot. But we're implementing those already in the framework of the association agreement, DCFTA, and visa dialogue, of course. But as Minister said, this is very much relates to the public administration as well. So this is one of the crucial that we have to somehow introduce to be as flexible as each and every EU member states in public administration reforms, along with all those that I mentioned already. Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, I'm going to have two questions, but this time I'll be short. You mentioned you are receiving some refugees from Syria and some troubled areas. This is the statistical question. What is the number of people you're receiving this year, 2015? And second question is, you talked about Russian-speaking population in Estonia. What do you mean by that? And what is the percentage of Russian-speaking population in Estonia? Thank you.
First of all, as to the refugees, the number we're receiving under the present migration crisis is 535 in 2 years. That's the EU distribution mechanism. But besides, we are receiving every year about 3,000 migrants, not asylum seekers, migrants, coming from the EU, and 3,000 coming from outside EU. So 6,000 are entering Estonia every year as migrants. And the number of asylum seekers, besides the 535, is about 150 persons. But of course we have to be aware that at the moment the migration is coming from the south. But we have to be prepared that migration will also, might start from the east. As to a question of Russian-speaking population, those people who are following Russian news, who speak Russian at home, and whose mother tongue is Russian, or whose language of communication is Russian. So they might be Ukrainians, Belarusians, Russians, whoever, but whose language of communication is Russian. And the percentage is about 1/3. But again, here, once you ask the question, I'm Russian, my mother tongue is Russian, Estonian is my first foreign language, English is my second foreign language. So I won't even make the difference who is Russian or Russian speaking or not. But for me, the distinction is who are Soviets and who are not. My family has lived in Estonia for 4 generations. I speak Russian with my mother, although she's fluent in Estonian, she's an Estonian citizen. She was born in 25, so she remembers the pre-war Estonia. She's the biggest fan and patriot of my country. So our thinking, we Russians have lived in Estonia, we own the country, we learn the language of that country, we become citizens of the country. Okay, I'm citizen by birth because I was born there. But that's the attitude. And then there is the wave of Soviets who were brought or came to Estonia after 1940. And there are different people among them. Some have the same attitude as mine and raise their children in the same attitude, that we live in the country, we have to respect the culture of that country, we want to be part of the society of that country. And there are some who share the political view of Vladimir Putin, that dissolution of the Soviet Union was the biggest geopolitical catastrophe. So there are different views among the people. What is positive? Positive is that we don't see, or I'd say we almost don't see people leaving Estonia, which means that the Russian-speaking population has chosen to live in Estonia, to be EU citizens or EU permanent residents or Russian citizens living in Estonia. They see Estonia as their home. And they want to live in Estonia. As I said before, they don't want the scenario of Crimea, and they don't want anybody to come to protect their rights in Estonia. So they are loyal to the country, and that's the most important thing. And we see that more and more kids are growing up bilingual. Yes, more and more Russian kids going to Estonian kindergartens, because it's a fact. If you want to learn the language, start learning it from the young age, and vice versa. I have many Estonian friends who are sending their kids to Russian kindergartens so that they pick up Russian language, because if you want to be really successful today in Estonia, you have to speak at least 3 languages: Russian, Estonian, English, and plus something. Then you can be really successful.